literally in the last few seconds.
Right, as we were preparing for the show. So we are going to talk about the Apple event coming next week, Thursday, October 27th. It's going to be about the Mac. We're also going to talk about our big inside look at Project Titan, Apple's car project. But let's start with some headlines. So earlier this week, we had a story about Apple hiring a top AI researcher from Carnegie Mellon to work on machine learning and other technologies. But what do you think about that? What's going on here?
So they've hired this guy, Russ Salakudinov. I think we might just be going live on some new platforms, in which case, hello to new viewers. But yeah, Russ Salakudinov, who's a bigwig in the AI machine learning world. He is a professor at Carnegie Mellon, and a lot of people in the AI universe are very excited about this guy joining Apple. Apple's had some big problems in the past attracting good talent because they have such an obsession with secrecy. They are not allowed, if you are an employee of Apple, to publish your research. And so employing this guy, they hope will attract more big names to the company. In other news, Goldman Sachs, their analyst, put out a note this week talking about a subscription plan. I mean, it was an interesting note. It was all about bringing everything that Apple does into one subscription. I don't know, Mark, what are your thoughts on the...
Well, I know we've talked a lot on this show and behind the scenes about the iPhone upgrade program. We think it's a really big deal that doesn't get enough attention. Basically, there's no real reason not to buy a new iPhone every year if you have this plan, because you just continue paying the same rate that you lock in at the beginning every month, or Apple might change it over time, but just keep paying for it, and every time a new phone comes out in September or October, they'll send the new one in. So that's
and the idea behind this as well is, at the moment, I think if you pay $30 or so, you will get a subscription to a new iPhone, and every year you get the new one. This one, they're saying pay $50, and then you would get Apple Music and Apple Films, for example, content from iTunes, all the services that Apple offer. To investors, that's really appealing, because as we saw this year, revenue has dipped and is expected to dip for the fiscal year.
But at the same time, the services has quickly become one of the top revenue drivers for the company, so that's very important for investors.
But also it allows investors to predict what's going to happen in revenue over the next couple of years.
Based on the stickiness of whatever this iPrime, whatever you want to call it, Apple platform is. But let's jump into the big stories of the week. So we started the show talking about how the invitations came out. The invitation, it shows an Apple logo with different colors in the middle, and then it says hello again below it. And obviously that's a nod to the launch of the first Mac by Steve Jobs in 1984, where he showed up the original Mac and wrote hello on the screen. The computer did it itself. So clearly a nod to Macs. And we've had a lot of reporting over the last few months, since July, August, about what Apple is planning to launch at an event in October. So we reported on a new MacBook Pro, a new MacBook Air, the potential of a new iMac in development, all sorts of stuff on the Mac side. Before we continue, Alex, we should ask the audience, let's throw some questions in. Whatever you guys want to ask us about the event, give us your thoughts about it. What are you excited about for this event? What do you think?
I mean, I think the thing that's really interesting is it shows that the Mac is not dead. Everybody thought that the iPad was a laptop killer. Steve Jobs is very much of the opinion that you didn't need to have a laptop anymore if you have an iPad or you have a tablet. And this shows that, the Mac is still a long-living, compelling product for users. Actually, last year, the Mac delivered more revenue to Apple than the iPad did. I'm intrigued to know what the margin balance is like. Which is more profitable, the iPad or the Mac? I mean, I think you seem to think it's the Mac. I'm inclined to think actually probably more the iPad, because it shares a lot of components with the iPhone, so economies of scale are better. But I think that's a question that's really worth digging into.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes all the way down to ASP. Macs can range from, there's one that starts at $899, which is right in the middle of the iPad Pro pricing lineup. But Macs go up to thousands and thousands of dollars. There's a Mac Pro that goes north of $10,000 if you load it up with graphics engines and such. So it's really difficult to gauge the pricing and the margins on that. And so back to the event, it's happening on October 27th. That's a Thursday, pretty much the latest point in October that they could hold this event.
While squeezing in their earnings report, which is next Tuesday
2 days
as well.
Before it.
So it's going to be a busy week.
Change the date in order to squeeze that event in. I think it's going to be a pretty jam-packed event for the Mac. So earlier this year they announced Sierra, which brings Siri to Mac. That's the new software. But this new MacBook Pro is going to be a really big deal. We reported that it's going to have a digital function row at the top. What do you think that would be useful for? What kind of people would be into that?
I remember back in the day, I'm thinking 15 years ago, when I had a Toshiba laptop, I'm slightly embarrassed to say, frankly, and it had a bar at the top where you could play CDs and music with the command keys at the top there. So one imagines then the iTunes would be useful. You can just hit pause, play, skip, whatever with iTunes. Maybe they'll be working with perhaps developers, we don't know.
Right, and we reported in our story yesterday that, as Alex said, they are currently working with developers on that. It's to be seen who these developers are. But the really cool thing to break it down is no matter what application you're in, the keyboard will show different controls just for it.
Right.
So if you're in a word processor, for example, you'll get bold, underline, cut, copy, paste. But if you're in iMovie, there's going to be a new iMovie update. We reported that you'll have a button to splice clips and do more advanced video editing right from the keyboard. So it's going to be very interesting for lots of people for different use cases. What do you think about the MacBook Air?
Well, the thing that I think is actually really compelling about this OLED tab is it's another big boost to the OLED industry. Like these companies have been ramping up production capacity in the anticipation that the next iPhone will have OLED. This is perhaps a test case to see how good it is.
Right, it's going to be on a much smaller scale, and if they're able to nail it on this, it'll have better proof for manufacturing partners for the iPhone next year, which we've already reported will have an OLED display and have no home button. It'll be integrated into the screen, so that's cool.
Let's move on to the next topic. This time last week when we were talking to you, Mark had just had the tip from a source that Apple's car project was in complete disarray and they were firing loads of people. So we spent the whole rest of the week between the two of us trying desperately to find sources who would corroborate this and give us further detail. Maybe let's open it up to questions. It'd be intriguing to know what you would like or would have liked to see in a car built and designed by Apple. But yeah, what was some of the intel we got?
Right, back to our story. So back in 2014, Tim Cook gave the approval to an Apple manager named Steve Zadesky, former Ford engineer who ran the iPod division for many years. And for 2 years, since 2014, they were hiring up people from Tesla all over the electric car industry to build a full-fledged car. But earlier this year, Steve Zadesky left. They brought back Bob Mansfield, who was one of the key engineers on the iPhone, the iPad, the MacBook Air, and some other stuff. Alex was explaining how Bob Mansfield is known for nixing products or changing products that aren't going so well.
I mean, he was head of hardware when the Apple TV project died.
Right.
We don't know that he was explicitly responsible for killing it, but it was in his universe, essentially.
Right. So basically, he came in, he said, hey, we're not building a car anymore. We're going to build the underlying platform. And then Apple manager set a deadline for next fall, later in 2017. So they're going to decide, hey, what are we going to do with this platform? Are we going to apply it to a car, go back to the drawing board and build an Apple car, or are we going to sell it to a car maker or license it to other
And I think the reasons for this were threefold. Firstly, there was huge confusion internally, real tension amongst management. What are we going to do with this project? People wanted to pull it in different directions. Some wanted to build a car, some wanted to build a platform. Secondly, they had huge difficulty engaging with the supply chain in the automotive industry. As the iPhone maker, they can kind of bully people a little bit. They can say, look, these are the terms under which we want your stuff. We want exclusive intellectual property rights. But if you're a car maker or you're a car parts maker, then what's the appeal of going to Apple, which for argument's sake might make 50,000 vehicles in the first year in 2021 or something, or selling a component to Volkswagen, which is going to make 10 million cars that year. So they can't, if Apple tries to impose terms on them, they can tell them to take a running jump.
It wouldn't work on a car, which Apple hasn't shown the ability to build a car. And now, after all these internal issues they've been having, if they even do go back to the drawing board and build a car, component suppliers are going to be like, hey, are you really going to go through it this time? And by the way, don't forget to send us questions about this, about anything Apple, about this Mac event next Thursday. We know everyone's excited about it.
I think also the third issue is, this is why we asked the question, what would you have liked to see in an Apple car? How could Apple have differentiated itself from anyone else? Which is why now they're concentrating on software, right? Because Apple thinks that maybe software is where it can bring value. In hardware, maybe there are some design things where the car would look very cool, but nothing's stopping. Well, I mean, if you've seen the concepts which were presented in the past few weeks at the Paris Car Show from Mercedes and BMW and a whole bunch of others, those cars look pretty damn cool as well. So.
Right, and what would a car designed by Apple's design team, Johnny Ive, Mark Newson, potentially bring us? And by the way, welcome to all of our viewers joining us now on the Terminal Bloomberg website and Facebook and YouTube. We're talking about the car, our Apple Car story that we broke earlier this week, as well as the Mac event, which was just announced about 15 minutes ago, happening next Thursday, October 27th. So let's, send in the questions. We'll keep talking about it. But in terms of what Apple executives, to your point, were imagining for a car, imagine being able to walk into your car, scan your fingerprint, the car being able to identify that, hey, that's Mark. or that's Alex, or that's someone else, and adjust your seats and everything according to you.
And particularly if it was designed for the ride-sharing, ride-hailing universe, where it's an autonomous vehicle, it arrives at your front door, as you approach it, it realizes who the user is, who the rider is, it adjusts it to all your settings, your light settings, your favorite playlist, your seat settings, as you suggested. And now, problem is that's a long way down the line. That's 6 to 10 years away, not 2 to 3.
And who knows now? Like the initial, as we reported, goal was to get an Apple car on the streets, like a street date of the early 2020s, but that's clearly impossible at this point. The ramp up to build a car is so long, and now they're behind. So
I think also one of the ways, the big problem as well for any tech company entering the automotive industry is if you look at Volkswagen, which is the biggest car company in the world, at least it was until the Dieselgate scandal, they do a sort of 6% net profit margin. Apple and Google, they do a 22% net profit margin. So their investors would probably have freaked out at that prospect. There is a way you can do a 15% plus profit margin on cars, but what it entails is you've got to be in that vehicle, you've got to be pulling all the data out of it and seeing what parts of the car are used regularly. So if you are driving in a city, do you need a fifth gear, for example? Probably not. But you can only tell that if you're already pulling the data from the vehicle. In order to be able to get that data, though, you must be building cars and then pulling those low profit margins to begin with. So that sort of 5-year delta of taking low profitability, probably not something that Apple or indeed Google has been willing to stomach.
Right.
And look at Tesla. Tesla's yet to turn a profit. It's a long way from doing so, and they've been around for 10 years. So
right, it is unbelievable. And of course, Tesla has their Model 3 related announcement happening this evening. So we'll see what they have to bring to the table today.
We have a question here. Would the vehicle be part of ride sharing for personal use? Frankly, we don't think there is going to be an Apple-made vehicle anytime soon.
But the platform could be useful if they want to partner with Didi, for example, a huge Uber. Now it's an Uber partner. It's part of Uber in China.
Great story on Didi, by the way, by our boss, Brad Stone. That's not the obligatory, pandering to the boss, but it's a really interesting story about Didi. Apple made $1 billion investment in, I think, May. And so, their ability to partner with someone is then facilitated by that investment, one imagines.
Right, and we have a question coming in from the audience asking, what is Apple's strategy to make devices more available in sub-Saharan Africa? That's a good question. So Apple really has not broken into more of the developing markets as much as they should have.
Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I think one of the big problems there is of course, connectivity.
Exactly.
Right? They do not have the widespread LTE, 4G connectivity that is, par for the course, at least in North America and Europe. It's also a big problem for Apple in India that, maybe in some of the metropolises there is that connectivity, but outside of there it gets very, very flaky very quickly.
Right.
And so the appeal of having a smartphone diminishes very rapidly.
Right, and we have people asking more about the Mac event. One of the viewers has asked, what about the Mac Mini and the Mac Pro? Let's get some context here. The Mac Pro, Apple made a huge deal about the Mac Pro back in 2013. They had this new version. It was a glossy black color, sort of like the latest iPhone, and it had a bunch of new powerful processors. It looked like a trash can, some people said. It hasn't been touched since. It relied on a lot of Intel parts, and we're not really sure what's going on, but it doesn't sound like there's going to be a new Mac Pro next week. Certainly we haven't reported that there would be one. The Mac Mini hasn't been touched since 2014. We'll see if there's anything in store for that.
Do you think that's partially a function of the fact that innovation cycles in computing are slowing down? I don't know, is that true?
Absolutely, and Apple is a mass consumer company more than ever now in this era of iPads, iPhones, and Apple Watches. The Mac Pro and the Mac Mini don't add much to Apple's bottom line. It might even be, from some perspectives, a money-losing proposition to develop new versions of those computers based on how many they sell. So that might be the reason they're not looking into those as much as they used to in the past.
Got a question here about virtual reality. Will Apple venture into virtual reality? I think almost certainly. One, I think perhaps a more interesting question, not to poo-poo yours, is augmented reality, because in gaming, clearly virtual reality is potentially huge,
right.
But I think the gaming industry is $350 billion industry or something, which if you think of the size of the smartphone industry, it's a lot bigger,
yeah.
And that means that the potential addressable market for Apple is a lot smaller. In augmented reality, you're still able to interact with the broader world. And so it makes it a more compelling product, I think, to get into that space.
I agree, and Apple has all sorts of patents, like one patent that we were looking at the other day. You'd be able to go in front of a street, wave your iPhone around, and open the Maps app, and it would combine with the camera and the software to show you where places are based on just tilting your phone. That's a cool concept for AR.
And from a business perspective, if you think about Google, it's hugely compelling because you can, push people well, if you can see where someone's looking, you can see what they're interested in, you can push adverts to them, you can push them towards a shop or a petrol station if it's in a car, for example. And so it becomes, the way you can monetize that, it becomes very clear very quickly.
Right, we have a question. Are the new MacBook Pros going to get the matte black color option from the iPhone 7? That would be really cool. We reported in our first breaking news story about the MacBook Pro back in August that Apple had tested versions in its trio of space gray, silver, and gold colors. We're not sure if they're going to be launched, if those move past the prototype stage, but if they have a matte black one, I know which one I'm getting, right? Yeah, so that would be cool. Yeah.
Another question here, do you think that with the kind of cash that Apple has, they should be investing a lot more in the Apple car, even create their own production line to ensure the final stamp of Apple will be made to a big margin? I mean, Apple doesn't make iPhones, so the likelihood of them, they contract others to do that for them, Foxconn or Hon Hai, whatever you want to call them.
Do you think one day Apple might build their own Foxconn?
I mean, I've wondered a lot whether Apple has integrated towards the customer in terms of like building its own stores and everything, and that's helped it control that relationship. I wonder then if it's worth integrating in the other direction and building their own production lines. They've done a little bit of that. They're building some of their own chips, I think, in Texas perhaps.
Yeah,
and
their own chip line in Texas.
And the thing is that the problem with that is that products come in peaks and troughs, and it's expensive to ramp up and slow down production.
The thing with Foxconn is they have so many different clients, Sony and a bunch of other technology makers. So just because they have a lull because there's no iPhone coming out in March doesn't mean they're sitting there doing nothing because they have other people to work with during those periods.
So as Apple would have to deal with those production lulls. We actually did a story about the car before we knew that essentially the hardware part of the operations had been killed. It was in Business Week from a few weeks ago, but we did a story about Magna, and Magna is this Canadian company, but has factories in Austria, and they build cars under contract for BMW, Daimler, which is Mercedes, and Jaguar Land Rover.
And make sure to read Alex's and our colleague Garrett in Canada. Their big story about this was absolutely fantastic. The headline was great. Where would Uber or Apple go if they wanted to build a car? This is the Foxconn of cars in a way. So to recap, we talked about the big Mac event happening next week, the Apple car, Apple's push into VR, AR, and we really loved your questions. And we'll be back next week. We're live every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific on the, where are we live on?
On the terminal, Bloomberg terminal, if you have one of those, Bloomberg.com, Facebook Live, and YouTube. Next Tuesday, of course, is Apple earnings. There is always some sort of comment from Tim Cook teasing a little bit what's in their production line. So hopefully we can address some of those issues next Wednesday and give a better preview, of course, of the event on Thursday.
That's right. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Cool. I suddenly made it seem like I was trying to get the last word.
What?
It's like my token thank you at the end was like, it felt like Veronica Corningstone.
I don't know what that is. Is that good? Cool. I wasn't sure what this quantum computing thing is.
I have no idea.
think it was someone trolling.